Hey kids, um, welcome back to your e-learning experience with Mrs. Donahue's English class. We're going to be talking about setting today for writing your dystopian narrative. Now, I noticed, especially B-Day, you were a little confused. Are you just doing the exit tickets? No, you should be writing your story. I have it listed as being due June 18th at 8 a.m. That's the morning, because our grades are due by the 19th. So I want plenty of time to be able to read them and grade them. And that'll obviously be a big grade. So those of you who are like right on the boundary of passing and failing should very much get that to me speedily. But you should be working on those even though I'm giving you the exit tickets for daily grades because listen, writing is an organic process, and especially in the conditions you're in, where you're at home, it very well may be that some of you are going to sit down like Thursday and have a couple hours where you just really get a lot of writing done. When you are like having a good writing time, it's almost like you lose track of what's going on around you. Like sometimes I get so into a particular writing track that I look up, several hours are gone, and I've also written several pages that I wasn't aware that I wrote. Like in my mind, I was just kind of tinkering, and yet time has passed and pages have happened. So, especially given that you're writing this at home under the conditions you're writing it in, I don't want to necessarily set a daily checkpoint for certain amounts of pages from you. But that's why I'm doing particular mini lessons. So we're going to start with setting. So setting, one thing that you must choose for your story before you can really go anywhere with it. In a dystopia, there's a couple of ways to approach how you choose setting. So either a dystopia is a direct response, a direct result of a utopia, or as I mentioned in the exit ticket response video, which you should totally watch, it can also be widely categorized as just a highly chaotic, disorganized state. So let's talk about the first one, the collapse from utopia, then we'll talk about widely chaotic worlds, and I'll try to give some examples. You are welcome to beg, borrow, and steal from these examples, and you are welcome to sort of borrow heavily from like other ideas, like other video games or books that you're familiar with. I've answered that question now a couple of times from students, like, what if I like X as a video game and it has a dystopian setting? Can I use that as a basis for my story? So true nerds will understand the phrase fanfictioning. In other words, you take the established property that someone else has, you add your own characters or your own plot, and you sort of play with existing material, provided that you state such a thing in the opening line. Like, you have the title of your piece and it's like inspired by this. I am fine with you doing that. So if you were like, here's my title, inspired by the video game Fallout. Yes, all day long. That is fine with me. True nerds would say that fan fiction is the greatest compliment. So the first type of setting that you can have is a dystopia, which is a direct result of a utopia. You can think of something like the Puritans. The idea of the Puritans is to create perfect society, but they eventually realize that they kind of fold in on each other until you get to the Salem witch trials. They realize they're all hypocrites and pretty much Puritanism dies out within a generation. You can think of something like Third Reich Germany. We are going to build the perfect Germany. It doesn't work out. You can even think of other dictators or tyrants because typically they have this kind of utopia platform. Napoleon Bonaparte. You can think of North Korea. You could think of something in the way of like a corporation or a political party that acts as a saving grace. Particularly in this COVID-19 world, imagine what would happen if suddenly a pharmaceutical company came out and was like, we have the solution not just to this, but we have the solution to all seasonal illness. We can solve allergies. We can solve the flu. I mean, we'd pretty much bow down before them. They'd become the golden calf that we worshipped. So they would help us create this like society without sickness. But if a society that had no sickness existed, how long would it take for some other problem to form. And what would that other problem be? Would it be that because we never get physically sick, we get what? Depressed. Maybe we get obese. Maybe other things start developing in us. Instead of getting sick, maybe we become like Wolverine and we've developed these super healing abilities so that we all become extraordinarily violent with one another. You see how you would kind of keep following the little rabbit down the rabbit hole and go, well, if this was true, then what about this? Typically, the utopia has a well-meaning center, but is inevitably corrupt. And that has a lot to do with human nature. If human nature seeks to eradicate some undesirable part of the human psyche, it tends to fail because you can't eradicate something like that. You can only contain it, or you can learn how to work around it. You can embrace it as a flaw. So the Golden Compass series does this. They live in a world very much like ours, but they call them demons, not in a scary way, but they're little animals, and that animal that follows you around is the physical embodiment of your soul, so that you and your soul can like talk to each other, and your soul can be like, this is a really bad idea, or do it. And you can actually have that conscience with you all the time. People in that society begin seeing this active soul right here as a flaw, because obviously they don't always lead us down the right path. It's a way you can hurt us, right? So how do you prevent people from becoming sort of morally wounded? You remove their souls, and they discover that you can remove souls from people, but only if they're children. So this society starts cutting the demons away from their children. And it leaves most of the kids dead or completely like shell-shocked wrecks. Like they can barely function. It's from a core of a good place. Like it's usually, if you think of, you hear a villain character monologuing about why this is worthwhile. There's almost always that villain monologue, like this is the core thing that we're doing and it's for the betterment of mankind. It happens in all utopias. It's also the reason they're dystopias. You could have a couple of you wanted to do the descent from like maybe a society that was all right to a society that was becoming the dystopia. That's absolutely fine. You could also do one that's a dystopia and we're coming out of it. So there's no restriction on which of those you choose. Could be very interesting, particularly during this time, to look at a society going into a dystopia. Because right now we're checking several boxes. Normal society is completely uprooted. Different rules of play apply to everyone. Things people told us were impossible are happening. Like check, check, check. It's the reason a lot of these books are flying off the shelves. I mean, digital shelves, literal shelves. People are reading dystopian novels more than they've ever read them because it's just becoming kind of eerily relevant. If you're looking for some nice light reading in your quarantine, highly recommend 1984, Brave New World, things like that. Maze Runner's good. Hunger Games, great. I haven't really dived into Ready Player One completely, but from what I have of it, very good. Second kind of setting that you could have is a world that is generally in chaos, darkness, or disorganization. This can be post-apocalyptic. This can be post-World War. This could be post-nuclear fallout. This could be post-illness that wipes out most people. Stephen King, the master of, pretty much American storytelling, has done so many things at this point that if you name something, Stephen King's basically written a novel on it. Instead of doing one of those, he's done things like The Mist, where life's normal until this incredible mist descends on everyone, and when you go into the mist, you never come back out. You could do things like Alien Invasion. Those things that rock, disrupt, and turn upside down the normal state of being would qualify as dystopia, because it is an imperfect place, right? Like if you're reading a book and it's about the chaotic aftermath of aliens unveiling themselves, that is dystopic. I've also given you a couple peppered in there ideas that you could steal. Like if you're like, ooh, aliens. Yes, take the aliens. Take them and run with them. Stephen King did The Mist, not my idea, but it is kind of a cool thing. Like, what if tomorrow you guys woke up and you looked outside, and it's not just that you can't leave your house because of COVID, but now there's like a fog that has a blue or purple fog that has descended, and we can't work our way through it. And suddenly your house is literally the only thing you have left. If you think of zombie apocalypse, like what happens if your neighborhood has to like be the neighborhood militia that fights off the zombies? Like, what happens? How do we get through? What are the important values that we're supposed to learn from a time like this? What are we meant to treasure or value? Your setting should have a lot to do with whatever the core problem of your dystopia is going to be. Zombies are inevitably about a fear that we can lose our humanity in a way that's out of our control, right? Because nobody's immune to zombie bites, and once they bite you, even if they don't kill you, you become a zombie. So a lot of zombie literature is actually deeply rooted in the fear that we're incapable of escaping like a savagery in our own selves. Deep, right? I mean, it's why a zombie apocalypse story usually starts with a group of people, and then you sort of slowly lose them over time. And you usually lose them to like poor decisions. Like you look at someone, you're like, don't go out there, and they go out there. Because we're incapable of kind of keeping ourselves level-headed enough. Which means our society is always going to be chaos, right? It's always going to find a way to some sort of violent end. There's a Robert Frost poem. I actually have it tattooed on my feet. Some of you have noticed my foot tattoos in the beginning of the year. Creepy. But it's about how the world will end. So it's, do you think the world will end in fire or in ice? And they said, I think I know enough of hatred to say that ice would work, but other people say desire and passion mean that it's probably going to be burned. You have to kind of consider what you think of as humanity's biggest flaws. Do you think people are naturally hot-headed? So maybe go fire. There was an old movie, at least it was old when I was your age, and it's probably so old you've never heard of it, but Christian Bale's in it, and he's great. It's called Reign of Fire, where someone accidentally discovers dormant dragons living in the deep subterranean parts of the earth, and then dragons come, and there's a dragon apocalypse. Dragon apocalypse is one of my favorite kind of apocalypses. Essentially, we released these fire-breathing creatures that turned our world into ash because we were so overly passionate, right? It's not always a good thing. You could also have, obviously, COVID-inspired, like an illness theme, like bioweapons, things of that nature. There's a lot of different ones. Bird Box played on the concept because of the blindness, but it was also about sort of alien or creature invasion as well. A Quiet Place was alien invasion. If things like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, anything that disrupts your own health or your own state of being or makes you question your own body is important. Because especially how do you get by when you can't trust your own physical state? Are people naturally caring, or are people naturally selfish? How does that play out in your story? You could do something with food. I'm intrigued by the idea of like vanity. I haven't seen anybody do dystopia necessarily where like physical appearance is the main sort of driving factor behind it. People have played with it in other ways, like Valley of the Dolls or Stepford Wives, but like imagine a world that became so focused on physical appearance and your digital presence, right? How you look on camera, how you look online. If your whole world exists online and your profile is the thing that is the most cultivated aspect, what could we be convinced to become? Behind the screen, the real person that no one ever sees. what would it look like? What would the seedy underground of that world be? Like people stealing one another's online profiles for betterment? What would the sort of gulf, the big divide be between online world and real people world? I'd be very interested to see how some of you would interact with a world like that. You might also think about government. Government's a big one. Obviously not required, as I discussed in my exit ticket response, but it usually has some sort of even background role in dystopia, because dystopia is your society, and society is so influenced by its government. You don't have to base it in America. You can. You can make up a place that it's in. You could be in this time and another time. One of the questions I saw was, if you base it in the future, how far in the future? No holes barred, do what you want. So when George Orwell wrote 1984, it was in the 1940s, and it was like the 80s seemed like a million years away to him, like seemed inconceivably far away. Now the 80s are so far away from you that, your teacher was born in the 80s. We still consider 1984 a futuristic novel, because when it was written about the future. So you could write about the year 2030. It doesn't matter that it's only 10 years in the future. You could write about 2121. If this is what 2020 is, what is 2121 going to look like? Where are you guys at on your apocalypse bingo sheets? Because I need Bigfoot, and then I'm good. In terms of setting, think of who would naturally exist in your setting. So either you're going to come up with your setting first, or you're going to come up with your characters first. They are going to play into each other quite heavily, okay? So if you have like teenage characters or young characters, does your setting lend itself to them existing? So like zombie apocalypse, there's a reason you don't see anyone under the age of like 13 in most zombie apocalypse literature. They just wouldn't survive. My 3-year-old's getting killed in the first 10 minutes of a zombie apocalypse. She can't stay quiet. She's bad on her feet. She trips over everything. I mean, this is a series of bad things. If we don't keep her alive, for whatever. She's just not going to make it. And she's going to be the reason one of us gets bitten. And the baby, forget it, cries whenever he wants. So if you're thinking of having young characters, think of how they would fit into your society. It'd be interesting if the particular aspect of your society that you were talking about was school. It's something that you're probably thinking about more now than you've thought about in years, right? You're so used to going to physical school and having school look and act a certain way that now that it's all different, it's given you some perspective. Wow, this worked a lot better the way they were having me do it at school, despite the fact that I always fought them on it. Or, this is working better for me now. I get this now. I'm able to, understand why I'm here. If you're doing older characters, consider what they've already been through. So if you have, say, like an old lady, because I've been referencing zombies, I actually have Carol in my head from Walking Dead. Carol's seen some things in her life. She starts in the first season with like a husband we got to kill and a daughter she's trying desperately to keep alive, and she fails to protect. And then Carol becomes one of the most like evil, cold-hearted, and yet moral people in the story. So you have to, if you have an older character, don't make them naive. Unless they've been incredibly sheltered and incredibly protected, and that's its own part of your story. Consider how much knowledge of the world they would have. So if you have like a 14-year-old character, you guys don't know an incredible amount about how your world works. You want to feel that you do, but you don't. So like teenage characters are in the perfect place to get revelatory moments, but they're not really in a good place to get things, to explain things to others. So if you need something explained, consider having an older, wiser character who has more knowledge and experience, and maybe explaining to a younger teenage type character who needs to have these revelations made to them. Setting and character should again correspond. They should be close to one another. Consider what you know as well. you should be able to feel setting. Like, listen to the Neil Gaiman chapters that I sent you, read the examples that I put on Google Classroom. You should really get a sense of that world and that universe. And you don't have to spend like 9 pages writing just on setting, but I should really understand, am I on Earth? Am I in a spaceship? What time period am I in? And it should be something that when your character is doing things, like if you tell me my character Bobby is getting a drink, I should have sort of enough basis of his world and his house that I can picture what that looks like. And it's not just, Bobby, a stick figure walking through a blank room. Like, give it some richness, give it some color. Bobby in his little squalid one-room apartment looking out over at the robot overlords, as he pours a lonely cup of milk because that's all the humans are given. Consider what the implications are. If you would like more direct inspiration, or if you would like me to maybe give you 3 options to choose from, simply ask and I will be happy to do it. If you have further questions, please list them on the exit ticket. I will be doing exit ticket responses after B day, because I have A day and B day doing the same exit ticket. See you guys later.